And thank you for watching State and Local. I'm Anne Marie Battistone, and of course this is Norfolk Public Access. You might remember in a previous show I had interviewed Matt Ravendo, who runs or has organized and runs a political discussion group at the Franklin Senior Center. And in connection with that, I was hoping to encourage more people to become active in politics. And my guest today is a friend of mine, Larry Sposato. He was the campaign manager for Mike Soter, who was running for Norfolk County Commissioner, and he had also been on the show a while back during the campaign. So I thought he might talk to us about getting involved and what's really involved in being a campaign manager. For those of you who might think that it's something that you couldn't possibly ever do, you may be wrong. Oh, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me,
Oh,
Anne Marie.
Now, what would you say would be the way for people to get involved, the best way to get involved in politics?
Well, there are actually many ways that you can get involved at a town level, particularly. There are many committees within each town that very often are looking for people, and if anyone has any desire to become involved in their town operation, it's a great way to do it. There's finance committees, there's business development committees. Depending on the town, obviously, there are different committees, and they're always looking for people. So I would encourage
for the bylaws and for the
Correct.
planning board and all of that.
Correct.
Now, don't you need to have a certain level of expertise? Because, I was on the advisory board a long time ago when I first moved here. I had no idea what they were talking about. I mean, it was I learned but it went kind of fast. So you probably should start with something a little less technical.
Absolutely. Depending again on the town, I don't know how Norfolk is structured, but as you know, I'm from Bellingham, and we have a master plan implementation committee, and it's actually a subcommittee of our planning board. And it's a great place to learn because you review the master plan and you get to learn about the town, what the plans are, where they've come from and where they're going. And so you learn a lot of the history as well as future developments in town. So that's a great place to learn. Another one that I think, if you have the aptitude, the finance committee, because every single item that's purchased or any person that's being paid in town or whatever is obviously funneled through the finance committee. So you get to learn the respective associations between departments, because some of them, for instance, the Board of Registrars falls under the auspices of the town clerk. So you get to see that in the line items on the budget. So that's another place to learn, and even to just review the budget and to kind of at town meeting time go through the budget on your own. You will learn a lot about how the town is structured.
Now, do you work at the town hall yourself in Bellingham right now?
I currently work in the town clerk's office. I'm a registrar in Bellingham.
Oh, right.
So I work in the town clerk's office, mostly doing the census and voter registration.
Oh, all right. Now, of the committees that you are on, what would you say is the most challenging that you found in terms of skills that you needed to keep up?
For me, it was I was clerk of the finance committee, and my background is not finance. So,
what is your background?
Actually, healthcare.
Oh.
I was most recently a director at a psychiatric hospital in Brookline. And so, I understand finance from the perspective of business, obviously,
yes,
but not at a municipal level. So it was a challenge, but I enjoy that kind of a challenge because I like to continually learn.
Exactly.
So I learned a lot about how the town operates through that budget, believe it or not.
Now, do you find that people that have been on those committees for a while, and I guess I think there's sometimes limitations. You have a limitation of how long you can serve.
Correct.
But you can also be reelected.
Yes.
Do you find that people get ensconced in those? Because I think that's what some people feel like. What I couldn't possibly make a difference because these people have been doing this for so long. They have their own agenda. Do you think that that's something to be concerned about, or just something to try to overcome?
I absolutely do. I absolutely do. And I personally was very concerned about that because when I moved to Bellingham, obviously I was a newbie, so to speak. So it's very difficult to break through. And I had to be kind of persistent. I actually talked to the Board of Selectmen because what would happen is once a person was appointed, when that reappointment came up, the general public would not know that that appointment was coming up. And so the person would just come through, okay, you know, rubber stamp again, rubber stamp again. And it gets to the point where I used to say that people think they own these positions,
Oh, yes.
and they absolutely don't. I mean, everyone has a right to apply for them. So what I would do is talk to your town clerk, because they have a list of every single appointment and when it's due for renewal. And
Shouldn't that also be posted?
it should be posted,
On the-
but it's usually on the website. Again, it depends on the town. And what I would do is, you know, make sure you get that list, regardless of how you get it, through the town clerk or through your website or whatever. And if you're interested in a committee, definitely apply. Because if there's only one person applying, if that incumbent is the only person applying, as I said, they're going to get rubber stamped and they'll be in for another term. And also you can find out through Mass General Law, various positions have a limitation.
Right.
And sometimes towns will kind of ignore that.
Absolutely.
Because,
Oh, yes.
because it's not brought to the fore. So,
Or they don't want to.
yeah, well, that's what I mean. They,
Yeah.
you know, so if you, again, if you're interested, then check that out. Go, you know, take that extra step, find out what the requirements are for the position as well as what the term limits are, and then go to your town. If it's the selectman that's the appointing body, then go to that body and check to see when it's next due and tell them that you want to apply.
Right. Now, how did you happen? I know you worked for Scott Brown.
I did.
What did you do for Scott Brown?
That's where we met, obviously.
That's right. Crazy night.
Yes. At Scott Brown's, I was actually a volunteer, and we did a lot of making phone calls and so on and so forth. And then through that, I got to know some people within the inner workings of
Right.
his campaign, and that's how I learned a lot, was through them. And so then I got various positions as time went on.
And what else?
So-
What else? What did you do after
well-
that? Was it through Richard Pila or?
No, that was actually through that, when Scott Brown ran for the second time in 2012, and it was also a big election year, presidential and so on and so
okay.
forth. I actually worked for Mass Victory in the Oxford, Massachusetts office.
Oh, okay. Were you there running the office?
I was the manager of the office.
Oh, yes, okay.
Yeah.
And now were you actually working for the Mass GOP?
It's Mass Victory, which is a wing of
Yes.
the Mass GOP. Yeah.
It's a little confusing,
very
all these
confusing.
different little
It's very
organizations so you started with that, so you must have met a lot of people there.
Yes,
And what did that job entail?
It basically was coordinating the operations of the office, which meant getting people in to make phone calls, getting mailings out, and that kind of thing. Which, again, if anybody is interested in working for a campaign, that's a wonderful place to start. They might think that it's a little bit tedious. I mean, but you learn a lot because you learn about the territories that are involved in that campaign as well, and you just get to know streets and places
Right,
and,
right.
and so on and so forth. And again, depending on the district, it could be all in one town, it could be multiple towns, and the more you learn, to me, it's always a benefit to you, because
Yes.
and you get to learn people from other towns. Like, we're from nearby towns,
Right.
but here I got to
Right,
meet you,
exactly.
and we have a long-going association.
Right,
so,
right.
You know,
And I guess there's a lot of networking too, and people come and go from the.
absolutely.
Now, so how did you then get started with being Mike's campaign manager?
Okay, I actually worked on.
He knew you from town.
He knew me from town, and
Now, how long have you lived in Bellingham?
10 years.
Okay, well,
Yeah,
not
yeah,
that
yeah.
long. I mean, a decent amount of time.
Yeah,
but
yeah, but I've managed to get through that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes.
I'm not a townie, but I'm accepted. kind
I mean,
of thing.
I've lived here for 20 years, and I still only know maybe 2 handfuls of people. So it's not always easy.
No, it's not always easy. One of the things that I did right after Scott Brown ran in 2010 and was victorious, a gentleman named Ryan Fatman
Yep.
was running for state rep from our district. And he's now our state senator, actually. And
So he was running for rep at the time.
he was running for rep in 2010, and he was victorious, and he defeated a long-term state rep that was
was
kind of
that?
ensconced, Jennifer Callahan. And nobody thought he could ever win. As he always puts it, the only people that thought he could win lived in his own household. So, but I had a lot of faith
And you
in
were
him.
his campaign manager?
No, I
Oh.
was an advisor for his campaign, but mostly I handled his campaign in Bellingham because at the time the district encompassed 4 towns, and Bellingham happened to be one of them. So I pretty much led the charge in Bellingham. So I learned a lot through that campaign as well.
Now, how did he know? This is going to sound crazy. How did he know that you could advise him? Was it because of your work on the committees that you've been on, or what
Partly.
gave him
Partly was
confidence
the
in-
work on the committees, but again, I'll give you a quick synopsis. I met Ryan Fatman at a Scott Brown event,
Okay.
and it was totally happenstance. I heard him talking to someone, and he said that he was thinking about running for state rep in the Worcester-Norfolk district, and my ears kind of perked up, and I said, "Gee, that's really something," you know. And I think I heard correctly, but I didn't want to butt in, so I waited till they were finished speaking, and I went over and I introduced myself to him, and I told him that I was a resident of Bellingham. I said, "And I thought I heard you say," and he said, "Yeah, that's absolutely what I said." He said, "And I'm so happy to meet you because Bellingham is a very important town in that district." And he said, "So, you know, it's some town that I want to get involved in." And so we then met and talked, and I told him what I had done, the experiences that I had had. And I actually brought him in and introduced him to some people in town. And he began to network that way. And he ran a very effective campaign, and he did what, you know, was people thought was impossible. And as you know, he's a very young man.
Yes.
At the time, he was still in his 20s.
Oh, my word.
And he's now 30 years old, and he's a state senator.
Wow. Well, you know, I think there's another piece to it is that these candidates need to find somebody with enough free time
Yeah.
who is also educated, who's
Right.
had experience, and that's kind of that's a trifecta that's not always easy to
Absolutely.
come by,
No, it's not
because
easy to come by.
if you have young children, like I don't have children, so I have more free time than, you know, a lot of people. But, you know, and I remember when I was making calls for Healy, what was her first name? She was running for governor.
Yeah,
I can't
remember
think of
her
her
name.
name.
I know what you mean.
But I
Was
was
it
over
Maura
at the-
Healy?
No,
that's not Maura
no, it was I can't remember.
She
her
was
name.
lieutenant governor.
Yes.
We'll say lieutenant
As a-
governor is her first name, Lieutenant Governor Healy.
And I was over making calls in Walpole.
Yeah.
And I just thought they were very, very careless and kind of sloppy. And, you know, I was just astonished, you know, but you've got to take who you can get, you know. And so, you know, finding, and then finding somebody who's had some experience, maybe a little bit older, but has the energy, you know, to run around.
Right. And that's true. You do need a lot of energy. You need to be able to multitask. And I would say most importantly, you need to be organized, which you probably have noticed is lacking in most campaigns. You know, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing.
Yes.
And that results from the fact that there's not, they need to have somebody heading it that is paying attention. Now, I've seen where one person is managing multiple campaigns at the same time. And I mean, that takes a very certain personality and skill set to do that. I wouldn't even entertain the idea of doing something like that, because generally, whatever I do, I try to give my all.
Yes.
So you have to be
Somebody's really
prepared.
counting on you. I mean, it's really.
Yeah, and there's a lot of, I mean, I know this might sound unusual to people, but there's a lot of money at stake. Because
Oh,
as we
yes.
know, sadly, and I say that it's heartfelt, sadly, our campaigns are based a lot on money.
Oh, yeah.
And it's very difficult to win an election when you're the financial underdog, you know.
Right.
And that happens to us a lot, particularly in Massachusetts, because there's a certain machine that people refer to, and the money rolls in automatically almost.
Now, did the GOP help him at all? Did they help Mike? So, because I remember they were very, very parsimonious with Scott Brown that first
Yeah,
time.
they were the first time.
And then flooded.
Yeah.
And they had that kid that came up where he was from Florida or what have you. I don't even remember that.
Yep.
And I just didn't understand that.
It is difficult to understand. The inner workings is very difficult to understand. What happens is, particularly in Massachusetts, the Republican Party is obviously not as large as the Democrats, and they only have so many donors and so much money to go around. What they generally will do is help to finance people at the state level, for state legislators and state senators. That's sort of their priority.
To maintain them.
Correct.
Maintain their,
to
yeah.
maintain, or if there's a chance that they could take, and we have, as you know, we've taken over some seats even in the last election.
Right.
So, but what they try and do is spend their money very carefully, and that means that if they think that a person has an opportunity, they will spend some money. If they
Right.
think that the person is just running and sort of, they're grateful, they're there as a placeholder, but they have no shot.
Right.
They generally withhold money because they don't want to throw money into a
Yes.
losing campaign. It's
Who
very
makes that decision? Is there a committee that makes that?
well, the
Do you happen to
candidates
know?
committee, the candidates committee of which I'm a member,
For the Mass GOP.
for the Mass
Oh.
GOP, actually does review that and advises the chair. That's basically how it works. The chair and the finance people, like John Cook happens to be in Massachusetts. But so what they do is they base it on what the candidate is showing up to that point. In other words, are they knocking on doors? What effort they're putting into it? Are they knocking on doors? Are they running their own fundraisers? Are they able to raise any money on their own? Or do they have some sort of a volunteer network in place? Because without those things, there's virtually no chance. And you know that in the past, we've had Republican candidates that just put their name on a ballot and don't do any of
Right.
that. I mean,
Yes.
even for higher offices, they basically just,
Yeah.
sat back and just, okay, I'm running, but,
Yes. Or just to get their name out
Yeah,
there,
I
and then
mean-
run for something later on.
yeah, I mean, Scott Brown ran for what was called Senator Kennedy, or Ted Kennedy's
Right,
seat,
right.
and he taught at the People's seat. But up until that point, it was Ted Kennedy's
Oh,
seat.
yes.
So whenever there was any opposition, there wasn't a whole lot of money spent because they knew that there was no chance.
And I remember when Sean Beelet was running, and when
Against Barney
when
Frank the
Joe,
first time, yeah.
Well, that.
Oh, and then Joe
then when Joe-
Kennedy. Yep.
I mean, I had a lot of admiration for him that he
Mm-hmm.
stayed in there because, although I will say they're very good down at that office. They were very good. I had a little issue with Social Security, and he had somebody in place. He says, tell him what to do, and they sent me a paper, fill it out, and they were really, I have to say, they were very good.
And that's one of the things that both his office and Barney Frank's office were very good at. But you have to understand that they had that structure in place for a very long time.
Right.
When Scott Brown came in, he had to build that structure basically from the bottom up. His first term was only a year and a half, as you remember.
Right.
So.
Oh, right.
So he didn't. Unfortunately, he may not have had the opportunity to respond as quickly or as efficiently as Senator Kennedy did because they were all very brand new.
Oh, yes. So now, what are some of the things that a campaign manager has to do? What are some of the, and is delegating authority a tricky thing? Because just as they've hired you, you have to find somebody you can rely on further down. So what are some of the things that your duties were when you were working for Mike Soto?
Well, firstly, it depends on the size of the campaign and the resources that are available. And also it depends on the election year, believe it or not, because
Oh, yes.
first of all, there are differences in, presidential elections bring out different people than off-year elections and so on and so forth. But if you have a lot of people, and I'll give you a good for instance, when Mike Soto ran, and I'll just talk about Bellingham because that's what I'm most familiar with, when he ran for county commissioner this past November, it was a big election year because we had all the state levels running.
Oh, that's right.
We had state representatives running, and we had state senators running.
So a lot of people are busy.
So a lot of people are busy. So you can't get the volunteer base that you can get. For instance, when Scott Brown ran in a special election,
Right.
it was a dedicated group
Exactly,
of people because,
right.
and I say dedicated in more than one sense,
Yes.
because that was the only game in town.
Right.
So that's all they needed to focus on, and
Right.
they were very dedicated to
Right.
it. So that's the first thing. The first thing is being able to find people and convince them that this candidate is a worthy candidate, along with the candidate, him or herself. Would have to help to convince that, but also that that candidate is worth working as a volunteer for no pay or as a paid worker but for very little pay.
Right.
So if people might have delusions of grandeur that these are great cushy jobs and and so on, they're not high paying jobs. they might, in some cases, lead to something that's higher paying, but they're not high-paying jobs.
But most people
at
do it
that campaign.
for the love of it, I think.
I
And,
think
you know,
they-
meeting people
absolutely.
and feeling like they're trying to do something.
Absolutely,
You know,
make a change in some way. Absolutely, I agree with you. But you still have to, you're going from a smaller pool, because in every one of the towns, there were 28 towns that Mike was running in.
My goodness.
And I'm happy to say that he won geographically the whole western part of the county, because the western part is very different from the eastern
That's
part.
right.
And he was able to win half the towns in the western part. Unfortunately, there were smaller ones.
Right,
but,
right. So the numbers, weren't there.
Right. But as you know, Norfolk is very diverse, and when the towns in the west have very little to do with some of the cities in the eastern
definitely.
part. So, for Brookline and Quincy are very different from Norfolk or Bellingham. So anyway, but in each one of those towns, they also had a state rep running and a state senator running, and they were working for some of the statewide candidates. You had a statewide candidate right here from Norfolk, as
Right.
a matter of fact. So it's hard to to get those people, because they're already busy doing
Right.
other things. And I myself found it very difficult, because, as you know, I have an association with Ryan Fatman, who was running for state senator for the first time, and I wanted so much to be able to help him. And I had Kevin Koros, who was running for state rep, and I wanted to help him. So, but I was only able to help them very
Right.
minimally. But whatever I could do, I would do, because they mean that much to me, and I would
Right.
do that. So that's the thing, and you also have to balance your personal life. And as you said, if you have other responsibilities, and we all do at one level or another, you have to be able to manage that, and to not totally neglect it, but know that you're going to not be able to do things as you normally do.
Right.
So it takes that kind of commitment. Again, if you start off as, say, making phone calls or sending out letters for someone, then you start to learn what needs to be done. And that you can do for the most part, at your leisure. If you want to go in for a couple of hours and make some phone calls for someone, then you can do that. If but you then see that you could dedicate your whole life to it if you wanted to.
Yes.
So again, it starts to set you up for what might be going on in the future.
We have about 5 minutes. So
Okay.
when you looked at the overall, when you became, what was the structure that you had to set up? I know they probably have the town captains. And then of course you had the event. Now, did you have to plan those events, or did you have somebody do that? What was the sort of the overall plan for that? If you could just
In most campaigns, there are town captains, and we ask those people to get volunteers, and we kind of ask them to sort of run the campaign in that town.
okay.
To the best of their ability. And we give them some guidelines and so on and so forth. But the campaign manager has to closely oversee all of that.
Right.
Because you want to make sure that there are activities happening in each town, and that there might be a town captain that can only get 2 people, so they decide not to do a sign holdout. Well, you need to know that. You need to
Yes.
have great communication with those people. When it comes to events, we actually did have someone at one point in the campaign that came on board that actually handled. She was a golf pro in one of her former lives, so she actually handled the first golf tournament that we put together.
Oh, yes.
And she did some of the fundraising events for us. But that doesn't mean that the campaign manager is divorced from it in any way. You're very much involved in it.
Now, who's involved in getting the signs and getting, the stationery and all of those kinds of
The
things?
campaign manager generally does that.
So now, did you have to? So in other words, you had to either have those town captains come to you to get those signs. So you must have had a day when they had to come in. Where did you organize it? Was it at your house? Or
For
where did
Mike's campaign, no. It was because it was so far flung territorially. We actually had different people, so there were some people on the South Shore that we would bring signs to, and then they would distribute to those communities. And then we had people in various areas within the district that would sort of be the ones responsible for getting them to the town level. And we sort of had districts.
What would you say was the hardest thing for you, the most difficult, the most challenging part of being a campaign manager? Was it trying to deal with people that maybe you had taken on that maybe weren't reliable, and you had to sort of confront that? Or what would you say?
Well, the one thing, and this is not probably what you're looking for, but the one thing was knowing that you're running an uphill battle. And
yeah.
you have to be able to, because the incumbent in that case was there for 20 odd years. He had succeeded from his father, who had been there for 30, so it was 50 years basically, with a one small interruption. So that person is definitely entrenched. He's a very nice person.
Yeah, he was here.
Yeah, he's a very nice person. But I'm just talking in general.
Oh, yes.
So that it's an uphill struggle. So you have to be willing to accept that. And that was always something difficult for me to accept, because I wanted Mike to win, obviously.
Yes.
But it was always in the back of my mind. But you don't want to have a defeatist attitude either.
Well, you seem to be a very positive person.
Yeah.
I mean, I've really never seen you when you were sort of had any kind of bitterness about anything that had happened. I mean, it's wasted energy, of course, but that's also a personality thing.
Right. But again, like I said, that's something that you have to manage, because you want that person to win so badly. You know that there's a good chance they're not going to win, but you have to go out there and fight as if you're going to win, and believe that you're going to win. So that's, as it says, it's like you said, it's a management thing in your own mind, But the other thing is, I think that getting everything coordinated and getting people in the play, I think that's the biggest challenge. If you can get a good network out there, your work is 75% done.
Well, listen, we're just about running out of time, but thank you so much for
appreciate
coming in.
it,
I mean,
Anne Marie.
I'm trying
Thank you
to
so much.
Oh, no, not at all. I'm just, hoping I can get, because, I mean, if something isn't done, I mean, we're going to lose everything if we don't get people, and it's astonishing to me how little people understand and know about what's going on. Well, listen, thank you so much for watching State and Local. I'm Anne Marie Battistone. My guest was Larry Sposato. He has served as a campaign manager. We're talking about that. And you've been watching Norfolk Public Access. And I hope you join me next time. Thanks for watching.